Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take you all the way down to New Orleans this time. Competition is on. 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 Competition.
Welcome to another edition of Hard to Paint with David Grubb, and I am glad to be joined by my good friend and one of my favorite guests, Dan Lust Esquire, host of Conduct Detrimental podcast and the master of the website Conduct Detrimental, which you should check out, which is the number one, I think, sports law website out there to go along with the number one sports law podcast. Dan, glad to have you back. But I'm sorry bringing you back at such a boring time in sports law.
Very boring. There's nothing going on. I have no billable hours. My desk is just collecting dust. There's just nothing going on here. Maybe we could talk about wrestling, but definitely not going to be talking about sports law here.
No, nothing at all.
You know, we could talk about, Dave. We could talk about, Dave, your Instagram reels, your game. I've been seeing you stepping it up recently.
My daughter has been pushing me to get more active and do more things. She's like, Papa, do more. And I said, okay, I'm trying. So I'm getting into it a little bit more. I gotta do better, but I'm stepping it up a little bit. Yes.
I see you, Dave. It has been stepped up. Tell your daughter it's working.
All right, I will let her know because she is pushing hard at being my social media manager at 14, and she knows more than I do. Of course, they know more. They know more. So that has been an interesting thing. But the biggest thing today, right now, of many big things that have happened today alone, is the announcement of Deshaun Watson, the quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. The NFL has extended his suspension from 6 games to 11 games, and he will receive a $5 million fine on top of the game checks that he will miss for those 11 games. Again, this is always a thorny thing because first you go back to the original decision by the judge, who says, this is the most egregious thing I've ever seen. The NFL has proved its case. And this is just, they only chose 5 women out of the 26 women that had allegations against Deshaun. They only chose 5 to present. The judge says, you presented this case. It's the most egregious thing we've ever seen. There are these conditions she put forward that he can never get a massage outside of the team facility ever again. And he got 6 games. And so then you get in the process of the NFL appealing to the NFL, which is always a weird thing, of you going to yourself to appeal punishment. And then you come back with what seems like a bargain deal, which it is, between the NFLPA and the league to come to this 11-game conclusion, which I don't think many people are satisfied with in the general public. It feels as if it still wasn't enough by the general public. And then the financial part of this still feels very light considering the overwhelming amount of money he got from the Browns. And the fact that they kind of tried to circumnavigate the salary by giving him a league minimum salary for year 1. It's the resolution, but it doesn't feel like this has been resolved well.
You laid it out well. I mean, it's funny. I've been covering this case for our shows for about a year and a half. So I'm in the weeds, as it sounds like you are. I did a Twitter Spaces a couple hours ago, and then as I'm talking this through, I'm like, wow, I could really teach a class on Deshaun Watsonisms, we'll call it that. And then, Dave, as you know, I'm a sports law professor at New York Law School. So I'm literally going to be teaching a class on Deshaun Watson. So you laid out a couple numbers. The way I like to explain this, just so people see where we're coming from and where we will be going, it's kind of, 66 masseuses in a 17-month period is the number reported by the New York Times. And that number sounds like a lot, but it's even more when you remember the 17 months was during, points during the height of the pandemic. So it's a large number. 30 women have settled separate claims with the Houston Texans. Okay, so of the Venn diagram of people, you still have about 36 that have received massages in some way, shape, or form, or they've given massages that have not settled with the Texans. Okay, 25 women have filed lawsuits. 24 were active. 25th had filed a lawsuit, but she withdrew it because she didn't want to reveal her name. So there are people that are writing on social media, and even Deshaun Watson's agent has put out a statement. He wants to put this behind him, and that's why he settled. And I'm like, well, there are still more numbers out there than there are settlements that have been reached, as far as we know. So, it's not really in the past. Yeah, Watson settling, for 11 games, and we could talk about how the NFL arrived at that number and Watson, but there is no deadline. There's a fancy thing in the law called the statute of limitations. That's your deadline by which you have to sue or bring a criminal case. So there is obviously one for civil and criminal court. There is no such one for the NFL. So Browns fans and Watson's like, okay, finally we're done. We can focus on the next 4 years of this contract. It's not really the case, because you could have someone pop up, I don't know, 2-3 years from now, halfway through the contract, and say, hey, Watson actually did something worse to me than what any of these other women. And then, Dave, to your point, you said something very interesting. The NFL originally presented the case of 5 women, and then I think we didn't really understand why it went from 5 to 4, but I think the judge only ended up deciding on 4 cases. So the 4 that the judge looked at, the judge found that sexual assault occurred in 4 out of 4, so 100%. So people have asked me why the NFL didn't present the cases of 24 or 30 or 66 women. I'm not sure. I know the stated reason, at least that some people have reported, that I guess the NFL only wanted to present the people that had like subsequent text messages with Deshaun Watson. So Watson, I guess, had said, had maybe apologized to some women via text. So he wanted to use the women that I think were the most credible. I think that's the easy way to put it. But I don't know, right? Dave, you've seen my take on this. And to put a pin on it, we can get into the money, the $5 million fine. And then there's also this condition that the NFL wants Watson to be evaluated by a behavioral expert who will give Watson conditions to which he can return to the league. So those are the kind of the cherry on top, the sweetener, whatever you want to call it. But the 11 games sounds like a lot. It's a little more than half the season. Sure, that's a lot. But when you're talking about 4 women, we're not talking about the 24, the 25, the 30, whatever. 11 divided by 4, which is what the judge found, is 2.75. So in the world that we live in 2022, you now have something on the books that says if you commit sexual assault, you're going to be given basically a 3-game suspension, a little bit less, which sounds very low. It sounds very low. So yeah, if you say half a season, yeah, that sounds pretty big, but you really do go into the mechanics of it. 2.75 games per sexual assault. You're at kind of Ray Rice levels here, right? And that certainly didn't go over well when that happened.
No, and then Ray Rice ended up losing an entire season, essentially. And again, Ray Rice was one incident, and it's not to minimize that, but we have to keep it in context. For Ray Rice, it was a domestic violence situation between him and his partner that, he had to deal with a one-on-one incident. And it essentially cost him his career, partially because of his age. We understand that the NFL eats up running backs, and that certainly drove part of that as well. But yeah, that was a physical assault on one person that cost him essentially his entire season. This is, as you said, 4 assaults where, again, she used the word egregious. Not just that they had presented enough evidence to prove their case, but that this was egregious. And to me, you're saying if it's something that bad, you can't say, I know that's what judges can do, but you can't lean on precedent and say, well, this is what the league has done before. You're a judge. You can set precedent here because you've not seen anything like this in the NFL. We've not had a case where a player has been accused of this many sexual assaults at one time. We've never had this before. So this, to me, you have to take the opportunity to set precedent here.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you, and I'm going to trust your audience here. We can have more of an adult conversation. I mean, I didn't want to do it on Twitter Spaces. I don't know, it just didn't seem like the forum to do it. But people can go through the complaints. We don't know which of the 4 women the NFL used. I've read all 24 complaints that were filed. I don't know if I saw the one that was withdrawn. I think I have. I think I've seen every complaint here. Of the 24, 25, we'll just say that there's some acts that were alleged that are grotesque, whatever you want to call it. They're allegations. Watson did settle all these cases. So he didn't settle some and not others. He settled all of them. the understanding is that he paid some money to settle all of the cases. I bring up this point because Judge Robinson, her decision, she drew a line in the sand between violent and nonviolent sexual assault. Violent sexual assault is obviously going to be treated more seriously than nonviolent sexual assault. But if you read all 24 complaints, I don't know, there are some acts that come pretty close to violent. I don't know who wants to draw that line. Judge Robinson found, and used the term egregious. She said that it met the definition of sexual assault. And, just from my vantage point, if you're saying something is sexual assault, I don't know how much further we need to go for it to be violent. I'm not sure who necessarily drew that line or why that line needs to be drawn. But, I'm certainly, I'm not going to be one that says, and I guess, Dave, you and I should point out before your audience yells at us, a grand jury in Texas, 2 separate grand juries, found that no sexual assault occurred. They found there was no misdemeanor sexual assault, no felony sexual assault, no nothing, no criminal charges. So if someone's sitting here, hey, how aren't we pointing out that a grand jury found the complete opposite? Fair point, very fair point. But the NFL didn't suspend him because of those grand juries. They waited until a judge who I think probably knows the law better than random grand juries, right? It's a separate, people can maybe debate on this at different standards of proof for the grand jury, which was actually a lower standard of proof than the judge. The judge looked at a higher standard of proof, something called 51% preponderance of the evidence, and said that the NFL proved their case. So, it's like in sports. If you play the same game on a different field, maybe you get one result one time, one result a different time. That's the best way to explain it. They're inconsistent results that were reached, but the NFL waited for a judge to find that sexual assault occurred and then dropped the hammer. So 2.75 games per sexual assault that are egregious. If they are the really bad allegations, and people can read the complaints, I'm not going to talk about it here. If people want to read the really bad ones, 2.75 seems light, and I'm happy to say it.
Yeah, and I think that when you talk about the violence part of it, when you are a 6'4", 215, 220 pound athlete dealing with women, there is a sense, you don't necessarily have to use the actual force of your physicality. There is some fear just of your size. There is some physical coercion because of your stature. And there's also that of your position within that community because you are Deshaun Watson. So those things too, I think, weigh into it. And I think it's interesting as well that as much as Roger Goodell wants to set up and talk about, well, we didn't think that the punishment was correct, we still haven't heard much as far as it goes for the Browns or for the Texans and their roles especially the Texans in not only helping in disseminating non-disclosure agreements for Deshaun, writing them up and giving them to him, but then also, like you said, facilitating some of these agreements. And it's just for the Browns today, when they have their press conference to basically again say, well, we're ready to just put this behind us. He's a young guy. You excuse these things. It's over and done with. Browns fans, I think that, football being football, the machine will roll on. But there's this heavy tone deafness that feels like it comes from the league here as well, that it's talking out of both sides of its mouth.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like anyone listening to this, I mean, there's just so many different elements to this, right? I guess the one that we should address too, right? Last year, Roger Goodell refused to put Deshaun Watson on the commissioner's exempt list. And that was in October. That was 6 months after I read the complaints. Everyone read the complaints. Mm-hmm. 6 months after the NFL learned about them. And I don't know if it's 6 months quite, but it was several weeks after the NFL had met with the accusers directly. So if you want me to make the other argument, it's like, okay, Raj, buddy, you didn't think there was enough to put him on the exempt list back then, but now you want to suspend him for a year? How does that make sense? Right. So they do want to talk out of both sides of their mouth. And even Watson today, and I didn't take to Twitter at any point in time and demand an apology from Deshaun Watson. It's not my position to do that. It's not, but then I do have to sit here and say, if you want to proclaim your innocence, I'm fine with that and not apologize. I am totally fine with that. I don't see it either way. But if you're going to apologize, he goes, I'm apologizing to the people that were triggered. And I'm like, who are you apologizing to? Are you apologizing to your team? Are you apologizing? You're not apologizing to the women because the people that were triggered, you can't refer to them by name. You're not apologizing to the organization. So I'm like, and then if you didn't think that was bad enough, Watson's team took to Twitter after that and tried to do damage control. Well, he wasn't apologizing. Whoa. That wasn't an apology. He's always proclaimed his innocence. So I'm like, so it's been mishandled by the Browns, the Haslam's. It's been mismanaged by Watson. It's been mismanaged by Goodell. I think all over the place. And Dave, the biggest thing that you and I have not spoke about yet, which, if we're trying to figure out why 11 games, I'm trying to figure out, it's a weird number. I said between 10 and 12. And that was the number I gave. It's between, the NFL reportedly wanted at least a 12-game suspension before this whole thing started. And Watson wanted at least 8 games. So I wasn't saying anything crazy. I'm like, they're going to find a number in the middle. And I think they're going to lean towards the NFL's. So then I'm like, 11 was kind of weird. I probably should have said 10 or 12. I didn't think 11. Now, why 11? It works out. Watson's first game back of this NFL season is going to be against the Houston Texans in Houston. So I'm like, okay, that was mismanaged too. We're setting this thing up to be this giant, media event. He's going to be back in Houston his first time. I'm like, whose idea was that? Just make it 10, make it 12. That was a pretty dumb decision in and of itself. So I don't know. I think everyone's got to get failing grades on the PR level.
And it's not over. It's not over. Like you said, there could be more. And as the cases that did not get settled go forward, there could be some very more damaging testimony that comes out. The financial part of it is I think is really going to bother some folks though too. The fact that, again, with the Browns and then paying him so little this year, knowing and fully expecting, the whole strategy, you could tell when they signed that contract was them knowing he was going to miss games and setting it up in that way. And then this $5 million, that becomes a tax deduction. Essentially he's getting a break in doing this. That fine it's money that he's going to recoup rather easily, and it benefits him ultimately in some ways to do this.
Yeah, you could say it's a tax break. It's also just like pocket change. He's finding in his couch when he's signing for $230 million. It's funny, and we should address it, right? You're a Saints fan, right, Dave? I imagine.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of organizations at the time. I remember it because we were covering really well. Watson was almost going to be released. If I saw different reports that if he was charged with a felony by those grand juries, he could have been released. So he goes from being the most, toxic asset from a PR level to being the most prized asset in the NFL. And there were, teams, the Saints who were reportedly attached to him, the Falcons, the Panthers, and the Browns. And of all those teams, I did research on it recently for something I was working on, all of them. Falcons were in the Super Bowl recently. Saints obviously won a Super Bowl. Panthers were in a Super Bowl not that long ago with the Jake Delhomme era. The Browns have had this, track record of futility dating and with the quarterback position dating back about 30 years. It's unlike any other. Right. I literally looked at it. It's like Tim Couch, Kelly Holcomb, Brady Quinn. You go back. It's crazy. So you have to wonder, to cover the story, you have to cover it from the journalistic perspective and the sports perspective. How and why would a team take that big of a risk on the guy? Pay him $230 million, part with 3 first-round picks, and kind of look past all the red flags, because the Browns are very clear that they did their due diligence on this. They didn't say, we made a mistake, we did this too quickly. They said they did a due diligence. They paid people exorbitant sums of money to do the due diligence. And then you have a guy like Tony Busby, who you, Dave, and I talked about, on our previous times I've come on the show. It came out that no NFL team reached out to Tony Busby. No one. So I'm like, I don't know how you could have done your due diligence. That's almost closing your eyes and stepping into the tiger's den and hoping for the best. And just saying, you know what, less is more. I probably don't want to know all the bad things. I don't know exactly what the Browns did, but I'd be really shocked, even knowing the Browns' record of futility, that they knew everything that was coming down the pike and decided to do it anyway. And the question that I posed on my show, I posed with random people I meet out in public that ask me about the case. I say, what's worse, knowing everything and signing him to 230 and trading 3 first-round picks, knowing it or not knowing it? What is worse? What says more about you as an organization? And I don't know the answer to that, but at least one giant chapter of the Deshaun saga is closing today. We're certainly not done, but a big one is closing today.
we'll do one more on the criminal side before we get into some of these. Well, two more, because it also, for Saints fans, they're very interested in Alvin Kamara's status. And it looks like for him, there won't be any discipline for him this year related to the incident that he had at the Pro Bowl in Las Vegas, where he was seen and is being accused of participating in an assault on an individual, group assault, him and a couple of other guys beating up a guy. But it looks like Kamara's going to skate through the season without discipline this year. That's a physical assault that was caught on tape. I mean, that's because casinos got tape. That's the one thing casinos do is have cameras. And like I said, Saints fans, that's good news that he's not going to, because they're expecting big things from the team this year. But at the same time, again, with the NFL, you have this evidence right here, and you have the authority and the ability that you negotiated to make these decisions, even without a criminal conviction. I'm very surprised that they did not try to take some action this year on Kamara instead of letting it go and sit for an entire year.
Okay, so we'll do another little bit of a sports law class here for a second. The NFL has kind of worked itself into a corner with the way the different ways, we'll say it different ways, they've handled punishment, right? So go to the furthest end of the spectrum. Calvin Ridley gets suspended for a year for a 6-team parlay. He was not competing in any of the games because he was away from the team. Year suspension. DeAndre Hopkins has test positive for PEDs. He gets a 6-game suspension. Okay. Stephen Ross, owner of the Miami Dolphins, it says the NFL says he has the worst tampering ever in the history of the sport. He's talking to Sean Payton, talking to Tom Brady, trying to make this big coup. He's also accused, what did you know, of bribing Brian Flores $100,000 to lose games. What's the suspension for him? 6 games. Okay. And Deshaun Watson gets 11 games, originally gets 6 games. Okay. None of this makes sense. Number one. Now, like you said one thing, right? All casinos have cameras. In addition to the casinos having cameras, Alvin Kamara walked into a police station and kind of admitted it. So I don't know if the camera, they say picture says 1,000 words. I say a video says 1,000,000 words. You saying it yourself says everything. There's no other words that are needed. That's all you need. So, and there's probably one other decision point or one other case that I think is relevant to this. It's the NFL certainly doesn't want to set a precedent. If you're accused of something by somebody, we're just going to suspend you. And I think that's what we learned with Deshaun Watson. They really took their time. So give the NFL credit on that sense. They waited. I think they probably waited too long. And if 24 women who don't know each other are saying something, I think that's probably a good sign that you don't need to wait. But whatever, the NFL eventually got there. Dalvin Cook is a guy, Pro Bowl running back for the Minnesota Vikings, was accused by a former girlfriend of assault. It was a bizarre situation. I followed that one very closely. That one's still kicking its way around the courts as well. But a woman basically, it's a bizarre set of fact pattern, but the allegations are that she went into Dalvin Cook's house. She had his garage door opener, and a physical altercation ensued. Cook said he had the right to defend himself because she was in his house and vice versa, but no suspension for Dalvin Cook. And that's an interesting kind of gray area going back and forth. Okay, so you have 24 women accusing Deshaun Watson of something who are not his girlfriend. They are just masseuses. You have an ex-girlfriend saying something. Okay, so those are the polar ends of the spectrum. Now, in the middle of this, you have Alvin Kamara, who's caught on tape and admits to it. So I've gone on a number of shows, different shows in New Orleans, Dave, and we know some of the same people. I go on their shows, and I'm like, yeah, I think the NFL is going to pretty quickly suspend Alvin Kamara here. I don't know what the defense would be. He admitted to it. He's on camera. And then I saw a report last week that it's looking more and more likely that Alvin Kamara is not going to be suspended. So I've just told you about 6 or 7 different cases. I throw my hands up. I have no idea what the NFL is doing. I cannot make sense of it. If you're a Saints fan, maybe this is good news. We are across the board in terms of punishments, when guys get suspended, which guys do not get suspended. The NFL has a punishment problem on their hands, and I cannot make sense of it. I study this stuff. It makes absolutely no sense to me.
And I know these are things that are negotiated through labor agreements, but is it time that to adjudicate these things through an impartial third party that both sides need to agree? I mean, because like you said, there's no consistency. I guess ultimately the league doesn't care as long as the tickets keep getting sold and the TV ratings stay high. They can be as inconsistent as they want as long as the product doesn't appear to be damaged. And at this point, there seems to be nothing to stop the NFL as far as its product on on television and on the field. So, I mean, but for the general public who becomes more and more aware of these things as we go on each year and is upping its knowledge of what it thinks the processes should be like, how long do you, just as an opinion, how long do you think this can go on with the league having some credibility in this? Because it doesn't feel like they have any now, but can you continue to operate this way indefinitely?
I'm going to set the over-under, Dave, at 7.5 years. And I'll tell you why I picked that number. It's not a random number. Like the random $5 million suspension they gave to Deshaun Watson. That's a pretty random number. The NFL CBA was agreed to in March or February of 2020. It was right around there, February, March. It expires in 2030. So that's where the 7.5 years comes from. The NFL and NFLPA were patting themselves on the back. It's almost like, that Obama meme when he's giving himself a medal? Like, they're like, we did such a great job. We fixed the disciplinary protocol. In the old system, Goodell could appoint himself as the judge over everything, or he could assign it to a handpicked person. We've replaced that system, and now it'll be decided by an impartial judge. And if there's any issue, it'll go to the old system. But let's not worry about that. So, shocker, it went to an impartial judge, and then Roger Goodell, basically took the case up on appeal to his own handpicked person, and that's how we ended up here. All of those cases I just mentioned, Watson, Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Ridley, DeAndre Hopkins, they do not all fall under the personal conduct policy. Some of them are just conduct detrimental, which is the name of our show, why we picked it, just means a lot of different things. Betting on football, the NFL has very different reasons to punish that are, what if we're just going to jump for a second, what Calvin Ridley did was not illegal. He bet on sports at a very brief window when sports betting was legal in Florida. He did nothing illegal, but he gets, like a year, right? What Alvin Kamara did, I mean, he's right now, right? There's a criminal case.
Yes.
So you could have a crazy world where Ridley gets a year and Calvin Ridley doesn't get suspended for a criminal offense. So I think it's a real CBA issue, but it's a problem that the NFLPA and the NFL have allowed to just kick the can over and over and over. And it's, for whatever reason, really full on display in the past 365 days with some of these offenses. It's probably even less than, it's probably like 8 months. So it's really a CBA problem. Maybe they could agree to some type of system, but it's going to be, it's a problem. Like NFL comes up with new rules every year and they do slight tweaks to the rules every year. But I think this is a real something that needs to be done with the collective bargaining agreement, because this doesn't make sense. What we're seeing. How does an owner who cheats to try to get Sean Payton and Tom Brady get 6 games? That impacts the on the field product. Calvin Ridley is alleged to have bet on games, right? That's pretty bad. It affects the on field product. DeAndre Hopkins, the PEDs, it affects the on field product. But if at the end of the day the punishment is 6 games and Deshaun Watson is getting 11 games, it's not going to stop social media from saying, Calvin Ridley was tweeting today. Like, I basically, he's just, the comment is essentially, he writes 2023 Calvin Ridley, like, I got a year and Deshaun Watson gets 11 games. What I did was illegal, and Deshaun Watson is being sued in court 24 times for sexual assault. It doesn't make sense. So it's an optics problem. If you ask me how long it's going to take, honestly, I do think it'll take, if you want to make a real over-under, it's probably like 4.5 years. It'll probably be done before the CBA is redone, but there's no easy answer. It's a real optics problem, if you want to call it. It's a real problem.
Is the ownership problem, do you think, the ownership discipline, because Daniel Snyder still has done everything he can to avoid his accountability and conversations regarding the culture in Washington. We still have this stuff about what's going on in Dallas. You have what's happening in Houston. You have all these things, and there doesn't still seem to be this very much of a movement towards owner accountability at all.
I will generally agree with you. I have to say one thing. I'm usually saying that the NFL is messing things up, but I will say they did something right. For years and years and years, Bob Kraft, Jerry Jones. You go through the laundry list of people that potentially have been accused of doing bad things as an NFL owner. By and large, no one's ever gotten any punishment. Jim Irsay might have been the exception, unless I'm forgetting somebody.
And his was kind of light too, considering it was a drug charge,
right.
And he had cash and drugs in his car.
Right. What did he get? A 2-game suspension or something? It was something like. Yeah. So, but Bob Kraft got 0, Jerry Jones got 0, and you go down the laundry list. So the Dan Snyder stuff is interesting, and I have long suspected that Dan Snyder and Deshaun Watson, that would have been an argument that if this went up to the federal court, Watson's team would have argued, hey, there's an owner right now who's dealing with sexual assault and sexual harassment allegations, who settled that case for, I think it was $1.6 million. Where is his, being raked over the coals? Like, where is his public lashing? You didn't have any written report. Nobody's talking about it. And he's indefinitely away from the team, but he's still allowed to cash the checks. And, now his wife is in charge. Really, who's running the team? So that was an argument I thought would be made up on appeal. But I made that point. I'm sure a lot of other people made that a point. And then what happened? The Miami Dolphins got in trouble, and Stephen Ross, the owner of the team, was suspended for 6 games. And people with the Snyder situation were like, where's the written report? And we had former female employees of the Commanders organization on our podcast, #release the report. We had them out here, because I'm like, if the league is not going to be transparent, I'm going to help provide some transparency. And what did the league do for this Miami Dolphins investigation? To their credit, they put out a written report. They put out their findings. I don't necessarily agree with the findings, and I actually think this was a bribery punishment more so than I thought it was a tampering punishment. But the league put something out in writing. So I don't know, Dave, baby steps. It is something positive.
Because it does feel like it's more to address the Flores situation, because it's their step for when they do have to go to court with Flores. And they said, look, well, we handled that part of it. We reacted to it.
Fair.
It's
that's damage control.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on.
That is very fair. Dave, I will say, an excellent point. I'm 100% going to steal that from my show. 100%. Because if they left that loose end open and they said, you know what, we were bribed, or they left it a question, that's probably a point that Flores' team is going to use. And Flores' team that day took to Twitter and actually took umbrage with that they said the same point that you and I I'm sure made. Like, this is a bribery punishment. The NFL doesn't want to call it that. So you are right. I take a step back. I'm not going to say baby steps. This probably was a moment of CYA if we're being honest.
The Britney Griner situation still is that one is so much more than sports, because this is geopolitics here. And she's filing her appeal for her 9-year sentence, which again is astronomically large considering the offense and precedent that the Russian government had in the past in dealing with these types of crimes. No one is disputing that Britney Griner shouldn't have had CBD oil or cannabis oil in Russia. We get that. And we know that countries have very harsh penalties, harsher than the United States when it comes to those things. But 9 years compared to what we've seen, and we're talking about less than it was like point something milligrams of fluid. And we've had people with actual amounts of drugs brought into the country who got months. This is bigger than whatever the WNBA can handle. This is bigger than whatever Adam Silver, whatever pressure he can put on as the head of the NBA. This is a governmental issue now, and obviously part of a negotiation. Does she have a chance, other than federal government intervention, of getting this sentence reduced?
The short answer is probably not. I don't know. I mean, we could talk about the fact that government intervention, we're talking about a story where almost trade rumors, it's like an MLB hot stove or NBA trade deadline, which is kind of gross, but in the same sense, it's better than nothing, right? For a while, we heard that this was had not gone to the highest levels of the government, that it just wasn't maybe a priority, or maybe it was a priority. They just weren't making it a point. There's conversations now behind the scenes, or I don't want to say behind the scenes, but it's being reported that a massive Russian arms dealer might be the trade for Britney Griner. And I'm sitting here I don't know, like cannabis oil versus and something that at least to Griner's in her perspective was something that she just packed very quickly and it ended up in her bag. Someone that, I think, I don't know if that's true or not. Who are we to say? But plausibly, could you pack something by accident? Yeah, I'm sure you could. Could you be an international arms dealer by accident? Probably not. I think probably there's some purposeful intent.
I mean, when your
behind
name is the Merchant of Death.
yeah, that's is that his Instagram handle?
I mean, that's not his. I mean, but that's what they call him. I mean, in international circles, if you're the Merchant of Death, I mean, that's a little bit more than Britney Griner, who's played in Russia every year for the last 8 years.
Yeah, it's what's Durant's nickname? Like the Skinny Assassin? Is there something like that? What is it? Something like that.
Slim Reaper. So, we joke, but like that's the fact that someone like the Merchant of Death is being talked at as a potential like trade for Griner tells you that her chances of getting the sentence reduced or getting on her own are very slim, and that the leverage is certainly in Russia's court. So I don't think it's a particularly good scenario that that the Russian political pawn maneuver worked. Right. I saw reports of different people that had different drug charges in Russia that were not named Britney Griner, that were not nearly as famous as Britney Griner, and they had much lesser sentences for, maybe similar offenses, worse offenses, but drug charges. So, the truth is, Dave, which I hope I'm right on this. When I saw 9 years, I spoke to different people. They said, was I surprised by 9 years? And I go, honestly, I probably was. I thought that number would be a much more egregious number, like 1 million years. But the truth is, like, the over-under on time for Britney Griner to get taken out of Russia is certainly much lower than 9 years. I would hope that number is closer to 1 year, right? You'd hope at least. So, we've already been there for a couple months. Certainly, you're right around that 1 year mark. And yeah, I mean, you're kind of at the whim of Russia to a certain point. The problem is, right, like it is a crime in Russia. She had no defense on the merits. It's not a case of mistaken identity or someone planted it. Her defense was not really much of a defense. It was, I packed them by accident. So, that's the problem. So yeah, you could always try to get a lesser sentence if you didn't do the thing, but Griner is kind of admitted to it. So, her hands are, or, for lack of a better term, her hands are kind of tied by the situation, as is our government. Another big one today, which I think is an earth-shattering one, is the Big Ten's TV deal. The SEC thought they had done a great job, and they got $300 million a year, basically a $3 billion deal, $300 million for 10 years. Big Ten comes out, and their deal with NBC, CBS, Fox, and some streaming, starts at $7 billion, could be worth up to $10 billion. The first thing I go to, and this is where my mind goes to, is, okay, how much are the athletes going to get, from this windfall? How much windfall is there for them? But also, you and I had a conversation not that long ago about the super conferences, the SEC and the Big Ten becoming the two conferences and everybody else falling by the wayside, because now where else is the money going to go? After you've spent, $7 billion on the Big Ten, which has the bigger markets than the SEC, which has, because the Big Ten now has LA, it has DC, it has New York, it has the Midwest with your Cincinnati's, your Cleveland's, Detroit, all those major Midwest cities, Minneapolis, all those markets. And the SEC has the more passionate fan base where you get a larger number, this huge number of eyes every week. There's not going to be any more money to go around for the ACC. There's not going to be any money left for what's left of the Pac-12. There's not going to be any money for whatever remnants there are of the Big 12. Even if those three join together, it just feels like this is pushing that inevitability of that those two super leagues are eventually just leaving the NCAA, and they'll have enough money to finance themselves and play by their set of rules.
I've certainly been one that's been very critical of the Big Ten over the years. I'm not saying anything today. I'm going into my little corner over here. There's nothing really I could say. $7 billion is a ton of money. And to the point that you just raised, it's not just major media markets, it's every time zone, right? So, I don't know. It is certainly, I don't know. It's certainly a crazy number. But the other thing to add, which you and I have not spoken about, but it's a conversation you and I spoke about over time, right? At a certain point, that number keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's a pie that it's 100% kept between the conferences and the schools. Now, when we talk about the NFL and the NFLPA, that pie is split, baseball, so on and so forth. There will be a point in the not too distant future where a school will unionize and will collectively bargain for, threaten to strike, all this fun stuff, and they will want a piece of that pie. There are people, you know that meme, Dave, with the guy like behind the tree and he's like putting his fingers together, he's all excited. Like you have the unions like that are thinking like that. Like that, and I had Jason Stahl on this, the head of the College Football Players Association. He's like a guy he's an educator, but he wants to help football programs unionize. So I go, power to you, player empowerment, so on and so forth, right? Players are earning that money for the school, $7 billion in revenue. Like, I don't know, maybe players should see some of it. So that's another interesting narrative here. $7 billion. They want to go out and go on their horse and say, look what we got. The time frame for those unions to start mobilizing, that clock is ticking a lot quicker now, right? There's just that much more money on the table. And that's a piece of a pie that will resemble any pro sports television contracts. So yeah, I mean, it's a big win today, but you know, that eventual loss when the union comes knocking, it's waiting there for the taking. So we'll let the Big Ten and all those schools have their big victory lap, and power to them, right? I'm happy they maximize those dollars because now the players can help maximize their own dollars.
It's interesting, too. It puts Notre Dame in a very interesting situation because now NBC has gotten out of the Notre Dame business exclusively and taken on the Big Ten. I think that puts a lot of pressure on Notre Dame, who has been this halfway in, halfway out member, first of the Big East and then with the ACC, for them to say now the money's not going to follow us. The brand is not the same anymore. If they want to compete for championships, or at least the money that's compete at that level, this could be the thing that finally pushes them to make the decision to join either the SEC, which seems weird because culturally they don't fit there. But finally, the Big Ten seems to have the leverage on Notre Dame to say, are you in or you out? Okay,
so this is where my Twitter sleuthing comes into play here. I have to think I'm gonna probably misremember, but I know pre-USC UCLA that number was being reported as a much lower number, closer to 1 billion than 7 billion. Mm-hmm. And so obviously, once you add two schools like USC and UCLA, you add the West Coast, you add time zones that you didn't have, that number jumps up a lot, right? There's just more content. So that's got to be factored in. The fact that this deal is being announced for $7 billion, I don't know if this is good news or bad news. I think it closes the door on the Notre Dame Big Ten conversation, at least for now, at least for the foreseeable future. I think the Big Ten, if they could have announced Notre Dame to go to the conference, they would have held off on the TV deal. They would have. So everyone reported that Notre Dame was having the conversations with everyone. Notre Dame is in the Big West or the Midwest. It's in Big Ten territory. Would have made a lot of sense. Now, with respect to dominoes, could they join the SEC? Sure. Is there another conference they could join like the ACC? Probably not. I just don't see it. But yeah, it does put it gives. If Notre Dame thinks they can make more money as an independent on a lot of these deals, they're going to do it. As a random aside, and I'm happy to answer more questions on the television deal, but I don't want to forget this. Have you seen the Manti Te'o documentary?
Yes.
It's all about Notre Dame. I just finished it yesterday.
Oh my God. Yeah. I watched it yesterday as well. And I was flabbergasted at the way Notre Dame handled it. That was very, it's catfishing, as we've seen. There's a whole show about it. And like they said, kids, he's far away. Your football. You always are going to question somebody, but I can't question emotions. Manti Te'o was a young man. He was going through emotions, and your emotions will lead you places. But when Notre Dame found out, and they said, we don't have to say anything, we're going to just figure this out. I had no understanding of why that was their PR decision right then. Is you know this is going to come back on you because you promoted this. You helped create this monster because you were glad to facilitate those interviews with Sports Illustrated. You were glad to facilitate those interviews with the USA Today and CBS and put him out there with this story and not make sure with him. Because to me, your job as a university, when you're a communications person, and I've been one, I've been an SID, you make sure your stuff is right. You need to know your story better than the player knows the story, better than anybody else knows the story. And they didn't verify anything, didn't check anything on this. I mean, if a player tells you that their girlfriend died, wouldn't you have done just some cursory information? Like I said, you couldn't find anything on Google about this person's existence in anything other related to him. And she's supposed to go to another high-profile university that you play against every year, that you clearly, you have a relationship with Stanford. It ain't hard to give Stanford a call. And you could have, like if you wanted to know, it felt like that was just one of the worst handlings of a situation by a university. They did not help Manti Te'o out at all when he finally came to them and said, this is what I'm confused. This is what I know. If he's telling the truth completely, and I have to take him mostly at his word because it seems plausible. Everything he said seems plausible, but what they said does not. It doesn't make sense.
Okay. So hopefully I said this on my show, and I always, Dave, I'm probably like you. The more I talk publicly, the more I think I'm going to say something that people are going to yell at me about. I watched the Jordan documentary Once Upon a Time, and it was very clear that Jordan got final cut. He was looking at Gary Payton. He's like, haha, the glove, right? That famous video. I watched the Jeter documentary recently, and Jeter also got final cut. Someone said something, that he didn't like. Jeter got to watch the clip and respond to it in the documentary. The Manti Te'o documentary was very clearly, he got final cut. It wasn't as obvious, but I, as we sit here in 2022, and after having watched that documentary, I am not convinced that Manti Te'o was completely innocent in this whole process. At the Heisman Trophy presentation, which I remember watching live, and I was a big fan of Manti Te'o. Not to say that I'm not a fan of his. Catfish stuff doesn't necessarily bother me, but they said, and at this point at the Heisman Trophy ceremony, he knew that his alleged dead girlfriend had come back to life, which didn't make any sense. So they asked him, I think it was Chris Fowler's on stage. It's like, what's your most famous moment about the 2005 season? He's like, well, I just remember when my girlfriend died, she said to me this, and I remember this, the last words she said to me. I'm like,
humble.
Wait, so you know that your girlfriend has now come back to life, and that was what you decided to roll with. So part of me, and obviously, Dave, to your point about Notre Dame, he was talking to either his parents, his lawyers, his agent, whoever he was talking to behind the scenes, about how to handle those questions. Someone told him to say that. Someone told him to continue the fraud at that time. So if you're someone that thinks that Manti Te'o helped facilitate this catfish, or was okay with the narrative as they head into the national title game, I certainly you didn't get the vibe that those people will say were silenced from the documentary. They were not in the documentary.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. I'm a sports law guy. I have a PR background, so I watch that very closely. And I don't know. I think they would have been better off telling both sides of the story.
Yeah, because I agree with you on that part. When he goes up there and like you said, he knew, and he says, I could have said anything, but in the moment, no. Like you're right. What he said was he was ready to say that answer. He was ready for that answer because, I've been around enough people who have been asked questions on the spot to know that when they are trying to search for an answer, he was ready. He had that, and it was down. And so, once that occurs, I think as soon as he goes to Notre Dame, I think we could have all dealt with it. You know what I mean? I really believe that as soon as he gets this call back, whatever, if that's the case,
put his hands up. I've been catfished.
Yeah, this happened to me. I'm screwed. I know this is embarrassing. How do we handle this? If he says that, and the university comes back to you and says, we're going to keep this going, we're just going to keep it quiet. Manti Te'o, if he says he's of that character, which is that's the thing they pushed throughout that entire documentary, was his character as a young man, that he always wanted to help people and do the right thing, then to me, there's no way that you could convince me as the person who says I'm always wanting to do the right thing to go along with a lie on that scale nationally, to go on television with something that I know is a lie. And then not only to go with it and not just not correct people, but to add to it and continue to add to it once you've known that it's a lie. Whenever you find out it's a lie, immediately, and you can say, well, I'm confused and I asked for this picture and all that. No, what that to me, that's the part that's always going to bother me about his part of it. But the adults in charge at Notre Dame, for them to say, we'll just keep it quiet and we'll figure something out and we'll manage this. This is crisis management now. This is no longer managing a PR story. You are managing crisis because you have something that is directly going to be, this is going to adversely affect this kid's career, which it did. It affected his draft status. It affected his entire NFL career. It affected the university's perception. It affected the integrity of that Heisman vote. And I do believe people did vote, put him in the final as a Heisman finalist because of that story. Yes, they absolutely did feel sympathy for this kid who lost his grandmother and his girlfriend on the same day and all these things. Yeah, those absolutely had to do with it. And it just feels like, they sanitized that to make us feel bad for everyone involved with no one having fault. You wanted to make it essentially where no one had fault. Like this person, because of their sexuality, which again, I get it. I understand the struggles if you're a transgendered person or you're conflicted and you're trying to have a connection with somebody that goes, but it went into it went to the point where it was criminal. And then in my mind, when you start saying I'm a dead, I die and you're creating other people and all this, now it's a bit more than just catfishing. You are creating an entire family around that woman. And for all these things that happen, they acted like the end of it is kind of just like, we all learned from it. And it was just, that was the disappointment of it for me. It was like, it was a tough thing, but hey, we're all the better for it today. I forgive him. I forgive her. I forgive them. No, it's not that simple.
Yeah. I'll say this. And again, I'm choosing my words very, very carefully. Manti Te'o, because I remember reading an Outside the Line story for ESPN where Manti Te'o was supposed to speak to ESPN, and he at the 11th hour backed out. He didn't want to speak to them anymore, and so this story comes out. Manti Te'o's had a solid yet unspectacular NFL career. You could tell if you watch this aided him at every single second of his NFL career. Why now? Why bring it up now? Because I'm sure Netflix gave him the bag. I'm sure Netflix gave him a huge bag, right?
And the Players Tribune produced it, which is not going to make him look bad. The Players Tribune is for the benefit of players. Derek Jeter owns the Players Tribune. Right.
If you really want to get past this, right? And the whole point of this was to get some sympathy. I don't want to say sympathy, but to tell a story, whatever. And for
tell a story.
Right. To tell a story. But, you let the narrative fly wild for 20 years. Not 20, maybe like 15 years. And now you want to come forward? Like, if you really wanted to put this thing in the past, you could have done this a long time ago. There was a lot of interest in this years and years ago. So now we get like the manicured version of like, what's the perfect way to handle this? And I'm like, I would have liked the raw version. So whatever. It is what it is. But I love those documentaries. That one, I think it's a good story. We learned a lot. But the reason I thought to bring it up, Notre Dame, once upon a time, the powerhouse. They had a brief glimmer of hope with Notre Dame, with the Manti Te'o era, and we'll see what comes of Notre Dame in the future. But they're relevant once again, at least for purposes of our.
They came off looking the worst, though. I think they come off looking the worst.
I think so.
Out of all, and Manti Te'o, again, I think people will feel sympathy for him in general. But there are always going to be some questions. I don't think the questions about his sexuality, I don't think that's the thing, because I don't care. And like people said, if that's what you came with, and I think that's where the Deadspin guys were dead on with that. It's not about the sexuality of this.
Right. Yeah, that was a good point.
It's about all the people that allowed this story to keep going on and all the people who were complicit in building this lie. And that's the media. It's Manti Te'o. It's Notre Dame. There was a lot of people who took part in building this falsehood, and those people should be held to account in some way. And man, that's has to take some personal account. I mean, really, I mean, there is some personal responsibility. You can only be naive up to a point when you're in that position. Again, it's not I mean, again, catfishing is real. I get it. We know it happens. People get fooled all the time, but it just feels like, dude, you didn't try. Like, if this is the story, you didn't try really hard, because it's not that hard. I mean, again, Notre Dame plays Stanford every year. So at some point, you would think during these 4 years, like, you didn't come to a Notre Dame Stanford game? We were on campus and I didn't see you? I mean, all these things just are just very odd to me, and just your unwillingness to follow up in your own brain and to keep having conversations with someone you've never seen. It just, that was just odd to me. And then for Notre Dame to just be like, yeah, we're cool with this. We're cool. Like, we're not going to tell. There's nothing to tell here. They wanted the Heisman. That's what Notre Dame wanted. They wanted the Heisman so that they could add it to the shelf, because they hadn't gotten one. They hadn't had a national championship since 1989. This was what they thought they were as close as they were going to get. I think Tim Brown had been their last Heisman Trophy winner in '87. So yeah, they wanted the Heisman, and but they won't act like that. They won't act like there was a selfish motivation, because again, like you said, it was the manicured version of the story. It's not the raw. I think his parents even held back, because I guarantee you his father is not nearly as composed about that as he appears in that documentary. If it went down the way that they said it did, there's no way his dad is nearly as was composed and be like, huh? I don't get it. Like his dad's like, I don't really understand. No, his dad's not a naive man. He did not come across as a naive man. You may be from a small village in northern Oahu. You are not that naive. You are not that dispassionate about a father and his girlfriend who you never met again. And and these people are from Hawaii. So, Hawaii is not a giant place. It just seems like something could have been done. It's very odd. It will remain one of the oddest stories that I've heard in some time.
This segment has been sponsored by Netflix's Untold, the Manti Te'o story. It's very good. I definitely recommend it.
But do watch it. Yes, do watch it. The last thing I wanted to close on was the NFL in St. Louis, because this continues to go on. We've been talking about this for years now, and St. Louis, the city, wants 2/3 of that money. They want the money, and because they already got screwed on the deal. I felt like they took less than they should have. But yeah, I think they took a bad deal.
Maybe you, Dave, have seen an update that I have not. It was just a few hours ago. Yeah,
I thought that the city is asking.
No, you might be right. I've been on Watson Watch the whole day.
Oh, okay. Well,
wait, let's read
for another time. But just from your knowledge of it, because you did talk about it extensively when the case was going on. Do you think that there's a legitimate that the city is going to get more money? I don't think that they are, because I think they blew their chance when they settled. When their lawyers settled, I thought they blew it, and they really should have pushed harder then.
I mean, I think they should. I mean, it's like the same story with Watson, right? You tend to get the best deal, right, when on the courthouse steps, so to speak, right? The deal for Watson was struck right as they were about to get a decision from former New Jersey Attorney General Peter Harvey. So I don't remember what the exact date was. It was like 90 days out from trial. It was a long time. So, the NFL, I'm sure, said, right, like, take it or leave it. If you don't accept it now, we're not going to offer you anything else up until trial. Everyone says that. No one means it, but everyone says it. So I tend to think that they left some money on the table, but at the end of the day, it's a $790 million settlement. It is money that, San Diego did not get for the team leaving, right? It's money that Oakland did not get for their team leaving. Both cities, at least people on their behalf, had tried to get that money for them. Neither city got it. So I want to say that the city of St. Louis probably sold themselves a little bit short. They got probably like 80 cents on the dollar. But it's better than Oakland and San Diego. They got a big zero squadoosh.
Dan, thank you so much. We could probably talk about a lot more, but it's always a pleasure, man, when I get to talk to you, because I learned something and just you just present it in such a way that it's easy to understand and digest, dude. I always appreciate you. Always have fun with you, Dave, and always happy to come back on. Man, tell folks, you got a new episode coming soon? We snuck in a non-Watson episode yesterday. We'll have a Watson episode of our podcast, Conduct Detrimental, coming out today, probably later tonight. But yeah, no shortage. We were joking, Dave, that there's nothing to talk about. You and I could probably cover another 6 topics that I know you're informed on. PGA versus Live, Trevor Bauer. It's just the world of sports law does not sleep. Even Miles Brennan, the LSU quarterback, who I'm sure you've had a lot of thoughts on, who highway robbery, gets his NIL deals and doesn't play football again. There is, in this day and age, and I've only been practicing law for about 10 years now, a little bit less. I never had a day in my legal career where there were this many sports law stories that we were following simultaneously. And I'm a sports law professor. I study the history of sports law. There's nothing like it. So it's a great era for us. And if you're interested in this kind of fun intersection, we would love to have you on. And Dave, I don't say this lightly, you are one of the best in the country. And eventually you will get the platform that you deserve, because you are fan effing tastic. I was going to say the F word, but I love the way that you present stuff, and I go on a lot of shows, but I always love chatting up with you. Tell the folks the website, because you can subscribe to get the newsletter, daily newsletter from the website as well. Wow, Dave, you did your homework. ConductDetrimental.com. I'm a subscriber. Well, we went on a hiatus because our guy Taryn, our boy Taryn, was taking the bar. So I'm like, you don't have to do the newsletter. This is just a fun exercise. But yeah, ConductDetrimental.com, podcast. To the extent that you want to get into the weeds, I have more information on my on any podcast. We explain how to get more involved. If you are a college kid, you're a law student, you're a young lawyer or a senior lawyer, or just someone that likes a legal space, there's always a spot for people to contribute. And if you're looking for work too, he puts up sports law jobs. He's always posting sports law jobs. So check that out as well. So for Dan Lusk, I'm David Grubb. This has been Harm McCain, and we'll talk again soon.